Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. We have come a long way in this journey for network automation. We understood in the first video why do we need automation. The answer is still very simple. We need to automate the mundane tasks that we do every day. We don't want to do the same task over and over again and do redundant configurations which can be automated through scripts. To do this, we understood what is REST APIs and how we can test our REST APIs through Postman. Then after that, we understood how we can use Python to automate our tasks of the REST APIs. Then we understood what if we then had REST APIs in our routers or in our devices, how we can use the SSH connection using modules like netmiko and paramiko in Python. So today we are going to change stance. We are not going to remain in Python. Today we are going to be automating using Ansible. And yes, we are going to start first with REST API features. So today what we are going to be using is an Ubuntu machine with Ansible installed, and we are going to be communicating to our MikroTik RouterOS v7 and use those REST APIs features that are there available in the new MikroTik RouterOS v7, and we are going to automate certain things. And we're going to see how we can do all these tasks using loops in Ansible. So let's get into it and let's see how we can do this. So if this is the first time for you, you do not know what is Ansible. Ansible is a tool provided by Red Hat, and it is basically used for IT automation. You cannot just automate your routers and switches. You can automate anything that is IT, your computers, your servers. The possibilities are endless, and it's a great tool, very easy to use. Ansible uses what is known as YAML. Now, YAML is a short form for yet another markup language. Although that is not true anymore because YAML has evolved so much that they have actually changed their acronym from yet another markup language to YAML ain't a markup language. So it's very similar to your XML, but the syntax is very easy. The syntax is very similar to what we use in Python, indentations, and understanding YAML is very easy. So instead of talking about how YAML is easy or not, let's write a small code and see how we can use YAML to write our small playbooks for our Ansible. So before we do that, what you need to do is you need to install Ansible. So if you haven't installed it already, you can go to ansible.com, and in your learn, in Ansible docs, in Ansible community documentations, there is an installation documentation for installing Ansible. So if you're using Python 3, you can use pip to install Ansible. In case you're using operating system like Linux, say you're using CentOS, or you are using, say, Ubuntu, then the process is even much more simpler. You need to just install the package and that package handler will do the rest. In case you're in Windows, like I am right now, you can do is you can have a parallel installation of Ubuntu inside your Windows, and in that you can use these installation instructions that are given and just install Ansible for yourself. So right now I'm in Windows 10 and I'm using WSL2, and I have a subsystem of Linux installed of Ubuntu 20.04. So you can do that. It's very easy. There are a lot of tutorials available on the internet. And again, you just need to follow these instructions to install Ansible. So if you have installed Ansible, then you will be able to do Ansible -- version, and this will tell you the version that you have installed. Right now, my installation version is 2.9.6, and these are the environment variables that are set for my Ansible. So in case you have already reached here, it's awesome. You can just open an editor like Nano or V, whatever you're comfortable with. If you have not been able to reach here, what you need to do is you need to first debug your installation and see where it has gone wrong. So what we are going to do now is we are going to open our editor, and what we are going to build is our first Ansible playbook. So in Ansible, you can run ad hoc commands or playbook commands. Because we're here working with REST APIs, let's create playbook first. And a playbook is a set of instructions that we'll give to Ansible, and it will go through them, iterate through them, and run it one by one. So let's see how we make our playbook. So let's start by building our YAML file, and the YAML file syntax always starts with 3 dashes. So this indicates that the file has begun, and in the next line, we are going to indicate what we are doing. So the first thing we are doing is using a REST API. Now the next thing that we need to do is we need to set a host. So since we're using a REST API feature, we are actually not going to be using a host. We're going to be using a host when we are connecting through SSH. So right now we can just put a local host, that is our system. And note that while putting the host and while putting the next line, that is if I want to gather facts, I put a small indentation in the file. And the small indentation is of 2 spaces. So this is, as I said, very similar to how the Python indentation works. So you need to be careful in case you're not. The indentation will land you in trouble, and to debug it is not that simple. So the next line, what we are saying is we don't want to gather any facts about our system. And in the next line, we are going to begin with our task. So now the indentation will shift from 2 spaces to 4 spaces, and we are going to be initiating our first task, that is for to debug. And what we want to do in this debug task is to leave a small message, let's automate. This is it. Let's save this, and we want to save this as a new file.yaml. So all the YAML files are stored with the extension of YAML YAML. That's it. So let's run our playbook that we have made. And to run the playbook, what we're going to do is Ansible-playbook, and we're going to give our file name a new file.yaml. So a file ran. There's nothing to do here. It's just a small printout that has come that let's automate, and everything is working fine. This is all okay. Now let's take this a bit further and let's connect to our router. So let's edit our files once more, and this time around let's create another task here. So let's leave a line and let's create a task. Let's give it a name. Fetch all interfaces of the MikroTik router. What we are going to do is next is we are going to be using a URI module which is inbuilt into the Ansible core. And what this module is going to be using is the features of REST API. So here we'll enter a URL which is going to be HTTPS, our router IP or FQDN, whatever you have made. So my case is this. Then the REST. If you remember from MikroTik RouterOS API documentation, we need to use REST, and then the interface. Now the next thing that we are going to define here, which method are we going to be using, and the method that we are going to be using is get. So this will do, but we need to put the username and the password. So let's enter the URL username. This is the attribute. So in my case, the username is Ansible, and the password that I'm using is Ansible123. So make sure that your password is not as simple and it's complex. I'm just doing it for demo purposes right now. Now, we also remember that in the documentation of MikroTik that the password uses basic auth. So let's force our script in Ansible to also use the basic auth functionality. So force basic auth, and the answer is yes. So let's save our file and let's run and see what happens this time around. So we got an error which says that certificate verification has failed. So this is not something new. We have faced this error in the past also, if you remember Postman and if you remember what had happened to us in Python. So in Ansible also, what we need to do is we need to bypass the certification verification method. So what we're going to be using is validate certs, and the answer is going to be validate certs, and the answer is going to be false. This should do it. Let's see what happens this time around when we run our playbook. So everything ran good, but nothing came out. What we need to do is we need to fetch the results that are coming and we need to print them out on our screen. So let's edit our file once more, and this time around let's do one thing. We'll input one more line, that is register results. So what this will do is this will save all the output in a variable results, and the next task that we are going to define is debug task, and we are going to print out this variable which is results. So we want the printout of the variable results. So let's save this and let's run our file to see what the output is. So we see that all the interfaces that are there on our router, we can see them here. Let's just scroll up, and the first interface that we see is Ether1. It's a Ethernet type interface. The second interface that we see is Ether2. The third interface that we see is Ether3, and so on. We see a VLAN interface. We also see a couple of bridge interfaces, one more bridge interface. So 3 bridge interfaces and then one v8 interface. So that means our get function is now working. So this is how we can retrieve information. But right now our objective is very simple. What we need to do is we need to do multiple tasks on a remote router, and task could be as simple as creating a bridge interface and adding an IP address. So let's do one thing. Let's modify our file a bit and let's make a couple of changes in it, and let's create a bridge interface on a router and let's assign an IP address. But while we are doing it, let's do it all in a single task. So if you see our file right now, our file is using a predefined method of URL, which is here. The method is get, and there is no body right now because this is a get task. This is not a put or post task. So let's change this and let's first make the task as put, because now we are going to be doing two things. One, we are going to be adding a bridge interface, and the second, we are going to be adding an IP address to it. And the objective is we want to do it all in one task. We want to loop through this. So what we need to do is we need to first make this URL a variable. Why do we need to do that? Because the first instance we are going to be using HTTPS IP address REST interface bridge, and then we are going to be using REST IP address. So these URL are going to be different, and I don't want to define two methods of URI and do this task like that. I want to do it all in one go. So let's first define few more variables here, few more parameters here. The first is the body format. So while sending the data, our body format should be JSON. so that our routers understand what is coming. And then we want to also give it a body. So this body is going to be in the JSON format, and so that our routers understand it. So to iterate through multiple lines of code or data, what we need to do is we need to create a new parameter, which is a loop. So we'll create a new parameter loop here. And what we need to do here is in the curly braces, we need to define two things. One, we are going to defining URL, and the second thing is we are going to be defining the body. So if you're defining the URL, let's define it for our first instance. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to make a bridge interface. So we are going to be doing REST interface bridge. And what we want here while creating the bridge interfaces, we know that we need to send a JSON data to our router with the name parameter at the least. So let's send this. So let's name our bridge as Ansible bridge. So let's take this to the next line and let's indent it properly. The second thing that we need to assign an IP address to our bridge interface. So REST IP address we need to add here. Now the body is going to be a bit complex. It's not going to be as simple because we need to define several parameters to assign an IP address. Now, what are these parameters? The first is the address parameter, and we need to give an address. Say we want to give an address of 5.5.5.5. The next parameter that we need to give in our JSON body is the interface. So interface, and then the interface name, Ansible bridge. This is the same interface that we had made earlier. So if you see here, we are giving two parameters. The first is we need to give an address, and the second is on which interface do we want to assign that address. So while creating loop, be very careful while assigning the variables and while giving the JSON data. So if you see here, my JSON data is wrapped under a single quotes because my JSON is going to be using double quotes, and this whole will be sent as body here. And in this case, this whole will be sent as body. And then I'm closing the single inverted commas for the body and this curly braces for the loop instance. Now let's change the URL and body in our. So let's change our URL and body in the main Ansible instance. And this has a specific syntax. You need to put it in the inverted commas, open two curly braces, close two curly braces, and in between you need to add item.url. So you'll be using an item list which is defined below in the loops, and the parameter that you're going to be using from that list is URL. For body, it's again the same thing, but in body from items, what we are going to be using is body. So be very careful. The variables that we are defining here are the same variables that are getting used here. Don't get confused by this, but this variable that is here is basically this variable that you had defined here. Also, note that there is a gap between the semicolon here and the actual body here. In case you were not able to see it because of my photo, this is the complete line. So the body JSON is the complete text that is between the single inverted commas, and you make sure that you are always closing this single inverted commas and the curly braces that you are using for the loop instance. So this is great. Let's exit it and let's run a file and see what happens. So for me, what I saw was a couple of red flags. but that didn't mean that it had failed. So let's look at it very closely now. So what we get here is that we get some JSON data back, and if in the end you read this, it says that shaded code was 201 that was returned by a router and not 200. So if you remember, when we were trying it out with Postman also, while using the put function, the put method, what we were getting was the code of OK was 201. Right. So what Ansible was inspecting was 200, but it got 201. So it said that this is failed. And again, here it's the same thing. The status was 201, but it was expecting 200. So it is failed. So that this problem doesn't come, let's modify our file a bit. Although if we check our router, I see that there is a new interface, Ansible underscore bridge, and it has been assigned an IP address. I would remove both of these. So let's go back to our Ansible instance and let's modify our file. So what we are looking here is that what we want our status code. We need to inform Ansible that you are no longer looking for a status code of 200, but you're looking for a status code of 201. So let's save our file again. And since we have already deleted it, this time around, there shouldn't be any more problems. So let's see what happens this time around. So the file is running. Okay, so it seems that everything has run good. We have also got an output because we had a debug on. So yes, our task to, okay, we didn't change our task name, fetch all interfaces on MikroTik router. This task should have been changed, but in any ways, our first thing is okay, that is we have been able to insert a bridge, and the second thing, we have been able to assign an IP address, and these are the debug logs that we are getting because this is what we had specified, that a result should be recorded, and those results are getting printed out right now. So if we go to our router, we see that the bridge has been formed, and we also see that an IP address has been assigned. So this is the simplest way you can use Ansible to automate your MikroTik RouterOS v7 using again REST API feature available on the routers, and you can push configuration on all the routers sitting in your office without the hassles of sending someone there doing certain tasks. You can test the setups or the pushing of the configuration of the routers first in your office or first in your demo or lab area, and after that you can start pushing your configurations around. So I hope that today's video was very helpful to you in learning Ansible. In the next video, what we are going to be doing is we are going to be looking into how we can use Ansible to configure the routers that do not have a REST API features. Also, our servers also do not have REST API features. What they have in common is SSH. So in the next module, what we're going to understand is how to use Ansible to configure our SSH devices. Do let me know in the comment section below what do you think on today's video. Please do subscribe to my channel to get the latest updates, and stay safe till we meet the next time around. Goodbye.